Well, hey there gang, this is Crash here from the Crashcast podcast, and I'm here with another build. Now you guys may have seen my OPQ builds that I've done in the past, and well, now I'm pleased to announce that Garrett over at Altitude Hobbies is now carrying the OPQ frames that I manufacture in my humble little workshop on my humble little CNC mill down here in Central Texas. What does OPQ mean? What is an OPQ? OPQ stands for one-piece quad frame. And that was the goal with this. I'm a crummy helicopter pilot. I'm a crummy multi-rotor pilot. And what I was looking for was a frame that would withstand the rigors of my attempts at aerobatics. And I developed this airframe. It's made of a plastic material. People have asked me before, can you paint it? No, you can't. Pretty much nothing sticks to this thing. It's the type of plastic that I use. But anyway, it's very simple. It's very inexpensive, as you can see from the price if you've found this over at Altitude Hobbies. And it is very, very durable. It is a one-piece frame, so when you buy this frame, you don't get anything but this one piece. But it works really good. We have, let's see, my goodness, as of to date, I have sold probably, well over 1,000 of these frames, and I've only had a couple of them that have been broken. So it's very tough, very, very tough. I have to say it's nearly indestructible. The plastic that it's made from, you can bend it, but it's flexible enough to to not snap in a crash. However, it is not so flexible that it feeds back negatively into your flight stabilization system. So it's been a really good one. It's held up great for my flips and tumbles and stuff in aerobatics. People love the things. There have been people build these things and outfit them with FPV capability and aerial video with a gimbal, although it's a very small frame. These things weigh about 6 ounces. It has a span corner to corner of 346 millimeters, so it will accept 8-inch and 9-inch props. I've got some people running the little 5 and 6-inch props on 4, 5, 6S setups and making little racers out of them, but that's for another day. Anyway, it's a great frame. I invite you to try it. If you're learning to fly quadcopters, if you're learning aerobatics, you're just looking for a beater frame to take out and have a ball with, and you don't want to have to worry about having to replace the frame every couple of weeks when you smack it in the ground, this is probably the frame for you. Now, like I said, in this build, what we're going to do is we're going to use things from Altitude Hobbies. Since you can go to Altitude Hobbies and buy my OPQ frame, well, just as well, you can buy all the goodies directly from Altitude. And in this build, what I've elected to do is I'm running the Supo motors. I've got 4 of the A2212-13s. These are 1000 kV motors and do very, very well. We're running the multi-rotor, the iPika 22 amp speed controller. So I've got 4 of those. I've got a power distribution board that Garrett sells. I've got my the other half of my female side of my bullet connectors for my speed controllers that I'll be soldering on. I've got some 947 props. You can probably see those here. And then I've got some other hardware items we'll talk about. Flight stabilization. Personally, I am a big fan of the Multi-Wii controllers. And this is a sample of the Multi-Wii. I really like these. This is the ZMR Hobby King board. I've got one of those. But for this build, just because I want to experiment a little bit, for this build we're using a KK 2.0 board. So choose your flight stabilization system and gather up all these cool components. And when I come back, I'll talk to you about the extra hardware items that you're going to need to purchase. Okay, now for our hardware, we're going to talk about a couple of different options that you may choose. First off, I want you to notice that on our OPQ frame, and all I have is a black one right now. I usually keep a white one on hand for video demonstration, and well, I sold it. But I want you to understand that between this center, well, this little hole here, which is a wire pass through, and our motor mount, I've got holes in here that I have drilled and tapped, and that's how your frame will come. And it's set up to a 1/4-20. And as I flip this over, you'll probably understand why. What I like to do, you know, we're going to put our battery most likely on the bottom of our quadcopter frame. So when we do that, I don't like to have my quad come in and land on the battery. So what I do is I try to put some landing gear in here. I elected to use this machine, or this frame was designed for it, but I elected to use some 1/4-20 nylon bolts and some jam nuts. They're all nylon, they're very, very light. I will tell you, these will snap. If you have a hard landing, come in pretty strong, they will snap. But the good thing is they're only like a 1/4, so, you know, big deal. Right? So you're probably going to want to go get 4.5" or longer 1/4-20 nylon bolts and nylon nuts there that act as a jam nut. So get those. Now also, you're going to need something to mount your motors. This frame is designed for anything from 370 class up to 450 class motors. Basically anything, and I'll try to get the angle right where you can see. Maybe we can see the slots, but this is set up to take any motor that uses the 16 by 19 millimeter mounting. So, you know, we're talking metric there, but any of the motors that have a 16 by 19 spacing, you're going to be able to use on this frame without any problems. That just so happens to correspond to my little Supo motor here from Altitude Hobbies. Without the X mount, I won't be using the X mount, so I can, you know, keep that for maybe another project. But the motor spacing is, if I'm not mistaken, it's 16 by 19, so we're going to be able to use that. But we're going to need some bolts for that. What I recommend, I have here, if it'll show up, well, we've got, get it up here where maybe you can see it. We've got some M3, again metric, 3mm by 10mm length. I like to use M3 by 10, and I like to use the corresponding little 3mm washer, and that should work just fine to mount our motors. Some people like to use two bolts per motor. I don't do that. I use all 4. That's up to you. You can do whatever you want to do there, but I use all 4. So you're going to need 16 washers and 16 M3 by 10 bolts. Now, when it comes to mounting your flight stabilization, there are all kinds of options here, and I'm going to leave that up to you. I'm using a power distribution board. One thing that you may notice when you get your OPQ frame, and I'm sure it's not going to show up under the lights because, well, it never does, but here in the center, I've actually got 8 little dimples that I've milled in that correspond to our 45mm bolt spacing on our power distribution boards. So the plan is that I can perfectly line up the power distribution board right there in the center by using those little dimples. There's 8 of them, so if I want to run this quadcopter frame in a what's called an X configuration, I can do it. Or I can shift everything over 45 degrees, and I can run it in what we call the plus configuration, where this would be the front, this would be the back, and then left and right. People that are into real aggressive aerobatics, flips and rolls and stuff like that, like to do that configuration. But the cool thing about these little dimples here is, well, what lines up with our power distribution board, well, we have the exact same spacing for, in this case, our KK board. Also for the same for this ZMR multi-wii board. Now, if I were going to use one of the smaller, like the Flip 1.5 board like I do, well, then I would just put all my, this power distribution board is where you solder in the connections, all your plus and minus power leads for your speed controllers. Well, I would do that on the bottom and leave this top perfectly smooth, and I would just double sticky, perfectly centered, my Flip 1.5 to it. Now, if you're running the little CC3D, the small board for that, you might also elect to do that as well, so that you can just double sticky it in place. Some options here that I have for you. If you're going to do the double sticky your flight controller to the power distribution board, and I've been doing that for a year now, since I designed the frame, I've been doing it. Well, then something that you might want to do is you can get a number 4 screw. And this is a number 4 by 3/4, I want to say. And I could actually drill a small pilot hole on the 4 dimples corresponding to the orientation that I wanted to mount everything. And I could put this number 4 by 3/4 wood screw in, and I could take one of these number 4. This is hardware store stuff. I just bought this at my Ace True Value Hardware just moments ago. I could slide that over, and then I could actually mount it right to the frame, and that's the elevation that we would have roughly, which is good. It's good to have that much elevation because that gives you room to snake your wires up in through there, because again, we're going to be soldering our motor wires to the bottom of that board. Another option that you may elect to do, and I've just got a whole bunch of hardware here, you might want to take, this is a 440 screw, or bolt rather, and it's I think it's 1.5 inches long, and I just happen to have a 440 tap. And this is actually what I'm going to do on my setup. I'm going to drill 4 holes through the frame, and I'm going to tap those 4 holes, and I'm going to run my 440, I believe this is 1.5 inches. I'll run it through my flight stabilization board. I'll put on a spacer, and then I will have my power distribution board, and then I'll put on another 1/2 inch spacer. And then so you get something like that, and then the remainder of it will actually thread right into the frame. So there's just a whole bunch of different options that you have here, and I would say do whatever fits you best. So what I'm going to do right now off camera is I'm going to go ahead and mount all 4 of my motors in place, and then we'll come back and discuss the next step. Well, as you can see here, I've jumped ahead. I've got all my motors mounted, and you can see there I've got the four bolts with the washers going through. We got those mounted, but I went ahead and took the opportunity to, let's move back there, to drill and tap all of these holes, because as I'd mentioned, I was going to use a 440 bolt, 1.5 inch bolt on this. So I've got them tapped. I went ahead and mounted my power distribution board. So I've got a 1/2 inch spacer, that's the Ace Hardware number 4 nylon spacer. That's a 1/2 inch spacer. I've got my power distribution board, then I've got another 1/2 inch spacer, and then I've got my flight controller. And the bolts are going down through all the way, and they're tapped in, so bam, we're good. Now, something that I would like to recommend that you do is, as you're building your quad, I've decided if you've built a few of these before, then you're going to know exactly what's going on here. But you can tell from the orientation of the KK 2.0 board that this is going to be the front. But if you're new to this stuff, once you decide, I'm running this in X configuration, once you decide which configuration you're going to use, let's go ahead and put a piece of, this is just blue painter's masking tape, but I'm going to put that right there, just like that, so that as I proceed on with this build, I don't forget, where the front is, because, we don't have props on, we don't have anything to show orientation. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do with this, I've got some soldering to do. I've got to fire up my trusty soldering iron. We've got to put some bullet connectors on, and the intent is that we're going to mount our speed controllers. I get these wires tamed back a little bit. We're going to mount our speed controllers just like this on each of the arms. Now, because the motor leads are kind of long, I'm actually I may go ahead and cut these motor wires back a little bit and put my bullets a little closer to the speed controller. But that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to put bullets on, we're going to hook them up, and I'm going to go ahead and run power to my distribution board. And don't worry, I'll show you all of this when I'm done. Also, we're going to take some Velcro. I buy Velcro by the large size. These are some scraps that I have. But this is just Velcro, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a patch of Velcro on the speed controller and on the arm. You might want to take a little alcohol and wipe these arms down. As I mentioned, this plastic that I use to manufacture these frames from is rather slick. Nothing really likes to stick to it. But if you hit it with a little alcohol, your Velcro, self-adhesive Velcro should stick to it, and it doesn't matter if it doesn't stick real well. It'll stick a little bit. We're going to eventually run a zip tie around that speed controller, each of the speed controllers anyway, just to make certain that everything works well and sticks good and doesn't flop around in flight. So again, just to summarize, we're going to get ready to mount our speed controllers. We're going to put our bullets on so that we can hook our motors up, and we're going to put our positive and negative wires onto our power distribution block. I'll be taking this all back apart again, but I did want to, just show you the mock-up, show you how it's coming together. So when I join you back again, we should have speed controllers on, and we'll talk about what comes after that. All right, we're back, and I've had some time to get some soldering done. As you may be able to see, I have shortened the wires that go from the electronic speed controller to the motor. I've shortened them down just enough to put the bullet connectors on and connect our motors, and nothing is too tight. We have a little bit of slack there. As well, I have put in my power distribution board, and since I am going to be running this KK board on top with about a ½ inch of spacing, I realized, hey, I don't have to flip that thing upside down. I can keep the power distribution board right side up and give lots of room here for soldering my power leads. So I've put on my red and black wires here that will go to my battery, and I've connected them to the power distro. Kind of hard to see there. And I made my outer path as my positive and the inner path on this distribution board as my negative. So I've just gone around and hooked all the speed controllers up to it. So we've done some pretty good work there, getting really close to having this ready to fly. Now, where are the wires that go to the speed controllers to give the signal? Well, I've routed them. This is the glory of having the hole in the bottom of this. I've routed all the wires out to the center, through the bottom. Now what we're going to do is one by one, we will route them back up and bring them through the power distribution board. But we're not gonna pull them all the way through. We can, but I would prefer not to. But I am going to set them up, just pull them through just a little bit. This would be a good time if you want to take a piece of tape and mark which each of these, which speed controller each of these go to, because you are going to need to know that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to route them all up loosely, and again, I'm not pulling them. I'm leaving the majority of it on the bottom here. I'm not pulling them all the way up, because the cool thing about having this is we're going to be able to pull the slack all out of the wires once we hook it to our flight controller and give a little twist and then tuck them back up in here, and before we put a Velcro strap there. So it's just a good place to store your wires. So at this point, what I'm going to do, we'll do front to back. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my temporary bolts out of the power distribution board, and I'm going to bring all my spacers up, and I'm going to put everything all back on here so we can start routing these wires. Okay, we're in the home stretch now. As you can see, everything is mounted. We've got our, I've put our flight controller, flight stabilization system, our KK 2.0 in this case. I've put it back on. I've run my wires from my speed controllers to the appropriate connections on the board. And I've also got my receiver. It's going to be probably kind of difficult to see there, but I've got my receiver here mounted, and all I've got is a little bit of double-sided sticky tape is what I've used on this one, and just a simple zip tie to hold it in place. But I've got the wires running from the receiver. I've tucked them in just a little bit underneath this board and then brought them back out because they were kind of long. And then I've got us hooked to our board there. So that's our receiver side of our flight stabilization system. So we are, like I say, we are in the home stretch now. The next thing that you probably want to do, I'm going to flip it over. Remember how I told you we'd have those wires down in the center? These are our wires from our speed controllers, and there's a nice little cavity in here. So basically, I'm just going to gently, I've pulled them all snug so that they're not flopping around on top of the quadcopter. But I'm just going to give them a little twist like this and tuck them inside. And voila. Now there's a couple of things. This is where we're going to put our battery. Let's see. I usually use the OPQ. The OPQ flies wonderfully with something as small as a 3S 1300. Of course, you're going to have shorter flight times, but with the lighter weight, boy, is it aerobatic. But, you know, the 1800, 3S 1800 is a really good battery size. I run 3S 2200s on mine, and I even go so far as to, I've run 3300s. So, you know, whatever you want to do. But if you're going to be flipping and doing aerobatics with it, which is, hey, that's what the OPQ is all about, what I would recommend is, in addition, what I like to do is I like to take my Velcro, and I will cut a piece, just a little piece right here and right here, so that when I put my battery down, it sticks right on. But as an extra safety net, what I like to do is I'll take a Velcro strap and I will put it in position here in the middle. Not only does it help to hold our wires in place, but I'll put it right there in the middle so that when I put my battery down, I can tie it off. Now, how are we going to hold it in place? Because there's no sticky side on there. Well, what I like to do, if you're going to go this route, what I like to do is take a couple of very small screws. And that is a number, they cost a dime, which is stupid expensive, but it's cheap in the long run. You need two of them. They cost a dime each at my True Value hardware store. They are a number 4 that is a 1/4 inch long. And what you do is you'll actually just position it over here and push it in with your screwdriver and just screw it in. You don't even have to drill a pilot hole. The kind of plastic that is that composes this OPQ frame is the kind of plastic that, well, it will create its own threads for a small screw like that without any problem at all. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to position this down, run a couple of screws in, put a couple of pieces of Velcro on here. That way, bam, I can put my battery in place. You will see I don't have a plug on my power wires. And the reason is I went to the hobby shop and forgot to buy plugs. So I'm not going to be able to maiden this thing until tomorrow after I get a new plug on it. But that's not going to stop us from finishing up. A word about the receiver, a little close up there. You can see how I put my receiver on. And, it's anywhere you want to put it. Since you're going to have landing gear on it to protect the battery, and these wires are so long, there's no reason why you can't come to the bottom and just put the receiver, zip tie it, but also put a little bit of Velcro stuck to the frame, stuck to the receiver. All is good. So the next thing we got to do, with the propellers off, I would take a little bit of, find it here, I would take a little bit of your painter's tape, and I would put it on each shaft of the motor. Just something that will stick up so that you could see which way motors are turning. And I would power everything up and make sure all your motors are spinning in the proper direction for your flight stabilization system. The KK 2.0 is similar to the multi-wheel system that I'm used to, and I ran these up before I put it all together, so I know that everything is going in the right direction. But the way that you want to look at this is that remember, we've still got our tape here marking the front. These motors, this left front is going to spin this way. And the way I show it is that if we pop this on, it's going to be at the front. It's going to come around so that the front meets the front middle. And I'll go ahead and cinch that down. And it's just the opposite on the front right. Now I've got the right prop here, the correct prop, but it's going to spin this direction so that the front motors, the outside facing the front, they're going to want to meet in the front middle, not to the sides. They're not going to meet at the sides. They're going to meet at the front middle. Okay? And it's similar on the back, where we can pop these on. And I put the props in the correct orientation, but the props are going to want to turn this way, where they're coming, the tips are coming from the back and meeting in the middle, like that. So anyway, maybe that'll help you to remember. But at this point, you put your Velcro on the bottom to hold your battery. Put a safety strap on there with a couple of number 4 1/4" screws. And then put your props on. Tighten your props down real tight once you know that they're spinning in the proper direction. And go fly your quadcopter. The OPQ has been a great frame. People are flying these things all over for aerobatics. They're flying them just for FPV. Put a little keychain camera on it and just catch you some aerial video. Whatever you'd like. Most importantly, just, have fun with it. Do aerobatics, flips, tumbles. Usually the only thing that happens when you crash is you break a prop. And they're cheap. Oh, and I have to say that the OPQ is almost single-handedly responsible for creating a whole new genre of quadcopter or multi-rotor flight. I've got a bunch of people that are using these for full contact combat. So anyway, thanks for watching my video. I hope this has been informative. If you have questions, by all means, you can email me at crash.hancock@gmail.com. Don't email me about the flight stabilization systems. I'm here to talk about the frames and such. There's a plethora of other websites that can tell you everything you have to know about your flight stabilization systems. So, get out and build something, fly something, enjoy this great RC hobby. Get your OPQ and everything that it takes to get it in the air at Altitude Hobbies. My buddy Garrett over there will take good care of you.